Well, okay, welcome everybody to this session today of the Philosophy of Physics Research Group, the Symmetry Group, the local group, as well as, of course, the Beyond Spacetime team that's on the Templeton project. As part of that Templeton project, we have also a visiting program, and Giuliano Torrengo from the University of Milan is visiting this week. And I'm very happy to announce his talk today. It will be, as I'm sure many of you are aware, a double header. So we will have the first 45 or so minutes devoted to your talk, including Q&A, and then we'll switch to Chicago and have the talk by James Reed from the University of Oxford being Skyped here. So please join me in welcoming Giuliano Torrengo on the experience of the passage of time. Please.
So thanks, Chris, and the project for inviting me, and thanks for being here, and it's also people in Chicago for being there. So let me start from what I take it to be an obvious connection between our experience of time and the central issue in the metaphysics of time. So we can say that experience makes manifest to us the passage of time as a feature of the world as we experience it. So we'll say that experience makes manifest to us a dynamic feature, T, let's call it T, of the world as we experience it. Given that, then we can formulate two positions in the metaphysics of time, one which can be labeled the realist position, which oftentimes takes the shape of what is called the A-theory of time, which roughly says that at the fundamental level, or objectively speaking, T is a feature of reality. And the alternative position, the antagonist position, the anti-realism, that according to which, at a fundamental level, reality doesn't possess T, but merely appears to possess it. Now, I think that the interesting questions are precisely those metaphysical questions, but today's talk will be mostly devoted to the philosophy of mind point of view, so to speak. So, in particular, I want to give an account of what does it mean that experience make manifest to us T. So what does it mean for experience to make manifest to us a feature such as T? Okay, so let me start with two pre-theoretical distinctions that will help us to understand what exactly the theory is about. The distinction I want to draw is between the ordinary belief that time passes, the common sense belief that time passes, a grasp of which I take to be trivially entertained by everyone, and which is, so we can say, which is part of common sense, of the common sense narrative about reality. And so it's part of experience only in a broad sense of experience, once encompassing our cognitive life at large, so to speak, abstract thought, memories, and the like. And so the belief I want to distinguish from the feeling that time passes, namely the experience as of time passes, which is a part of experience in a stricter sense, namely in a sense that include only presently occurring mental episodes. From now on, when I talk about experience, I will talk about experience in this second sense, strict sense. Now, as I said, those are pre-theoretical distinctions. I'm sure that whoever is familiar with the literature on the topic knows that already talking about the existence of a feeling that time passes, the feeling of the passage might be taken not to be as a theory neutral way to speak. So I'm aware of these, and my point is that there is a way to pin down a notion which is as pre-theoretical as possible. So the idea is that among our beliefs, ordinary beliefs, there is not just the belief that time passes, but also that we believe that time passes because we feel it passing. So the idea is that whatever, I want to give an account of whatever experience in the stricter sense play this role. So play the role of being such that it is because of having it that we believe that time passes. Okay, and I think this is to be a very neutral way to talk about the experience. So it's a very neutral way to ask the theoretical question, which is what is the status of the feeling of time passing? In particular, to anticipate a little bit things that we will see in a moment, the idea is that it could be a specific feeling, a feeling that is, as it were, of pure passage, which is distinct from the feeling of experiencing qualitative change or motion, or it could be in some sense reduced to the feeling of change or motion, or also it could be that, well, we believe that time passes because actually we mistake some other feeling for the feeling of the passage of time. So when I ask this theoretical question, I want to be, I'm asking what's going on here with respect to the feeling of the passage of time without assuming anything as much as possible about the feelings of the passage of time. Only that it has to fulfill this role. So this is the only way to pin the notion. So having said that, let me also fix some terminology that I'm going to use in explaining the various theories and defending mine. So experience is not, we talk about experiences not just in the broad and stricter sense, as I explained before, but when we talk about experience in the strict sense, we can talk about token experiences, so concrete events, mental episodes that each of us has, or type experiences, which if you want you can thought of as classes of such token experiences, individuated through two features, namely what I call the phenomenal character, the what it's like to have an experiences of a certain kind. For instance, take a visual experience of something red. Well, you can individuate a type of experience as an experience of that has the phenomenal character, which corresponds to what it's like to experiencing visually something red, seeing something red. Okay. And the representational content, so what the experience represent, namely what, if you want, what the experience represents in terms of the how the world is like according to the experience. Of course, the relation between those two things is controversial, and people like a position in philosophy of mind is it's called representationalism, and basically, according to such a position, phenomenal character is supervenient on the representational content or identical to the representational content. But in general, as of now, I don't want to make any assumption about this. Okay. If you're puzzled about an example of a phenomenal character that doesn't correspond to representational content, well, there are examples such as a pain in the wrist. It could be an experience which is a bodily pain, is an experience that has what it's like to have that experience, but that doesn't have a clear representational content. Or maybe a mood, being in a certain mood has a certain what it's like to be there's a certain phenomenal character, but doesn't represent anything. Okay. I mean, that's just as examples. So, if we talk about phenomenal character as a specific ingredient of the what is like to have a certain experience, then we can talk about, if it exists, of course, something like the phenomenal character ET, which is the phenomenal character of the feeling of the passage of time. So the phenomenal character of the pure passage. Okay. And of course, also if it exists, the corresponding representational content, representing the word as containing not just change, qualitative change, motion, and all other features, but also the passage of time. Okay, and of course, precisely because those are specific character, I want them to be distinguished by what I call experiences of temporal features, or to be more neutral, I will just talk about T features, okay, which are things like experience of change, experience of movement, succession, persistence, and duration. Okay. So, how to account for the feeling of passage of time? Let me give an overview of the positions. There is what I call the naive representationalism. That's a typo, sorry. This is a C-T, not EC. Okay. And according to naive representationalism, we experience our experience as have the passage quale, so to say, because we represent the word as being such that time passes. So there is something like pure passage. This pure passage is represented by our experiences, and that's why we have the feeling of the passage of time. Okay. Notice that a position like naive representationalism, although it doesn't entail neither realism nor anti-realism in metaphysics, is definitely sympathetic with respect to the realistic position. Okay? Simply because if you endorse realism, you can say that you can have an account of what is our experience of the passage of time in terms of a perception of that feature. So a veridical perception. How come that we feel the passage of time? Well, we perceive it. It seems a very linear and neat explanation. Okay. Then there are two other positions which I will not take into account today, which are basically are positions which are much more sympathetic with respect to the anti-realist account anti-realist position in metaphysics, and according to those, basically what explain the dynamic ingredient of our experience is given by the tensed format of our representation. I don't want to talk about those today. Just roughly, my idea is that those may be very good account of what makes our experience temporally located and temporally perspectival, but are no starter for an account of why our experience is dynamical. We can talk about that with respect to the Q&A if you want. Another position which is, which as problem as we will see, but which is at least a possible account of why our experience is dynamic, is what I call reductionism. And according to reductionism, and ET is somehow to be reduced to experience of temporal features, of T features. At least in the minimal sense that experience of T features are responsible for ET, namely every experience of a temporal feature, let's say experience of something moving or something changed its qualities, is also an experience that has ET. So it's also an experience that has this dynamic element in it. Notice that reductionism, as opposed to naive representationalism, is a much more friendly position with respect to the anti-realist, because the account that the reductionist gives of the experience of the passage of time is such that the only things that we need in the world are T features. And T features are perfectly kosher for the anti-realist. The anti-realists just want to deny that pure passage is part of reality, not that temporal succession or qualitative change or movement are not part of reality. Okay. And then we have deflationism. According to deflationism, our experience of the passage of time has to be accounted in terms of a sort of an error theory. So according to Deflationism, experiences of the features are responsible. We mistake experiences of the features for experiences possessing ET. So basically, according to Deflationists, there is no such thing as a peculiar passage quality. There is no such thing as the sensation of the passage of time. There are only experiences possessing phenomenal character corresponding to, oh, there is movement, or there is qualitative change, and these sort of things. But we mistake those experiences for experiences that tell us that time is passing. Okay. And then, according to the last position, which is the one that I want to defend, so the last position, according to the last position, we should acknowledge the existence of ET, so of a specific quality of passage, but we should not account for it in representational terms, neither in the sense of the naive representationalism, nor in the sense of the reductionist, but rather we should understand this phenomenal character of passage as a non-representational feature of the content, so a feature that modifies the way the content feels, but doesn't correspond to any representation of the world or how the world is like. Roughly as when something happens to our eyes and our vision is blurred, we have an experience of the world that feel blurry, but we don't represent things as having boundaries as indeterminate, as indeterminate. I will talk about this, of course. So what's wrong with the naive representationalism? So quickly, naive representationalism cannot work, neither whether realism is true nor whether realism is false. So the idea is that if realism is true, we have, as we've seen before, the most natural interpretation of naive representationalism. So if realism is true, the naive representationalist can say that our experience as ET because we perceive T. But there are good arguments. I take, in particular, Simon Prosser in a couple of papers has elaborated a very good argument to the fact that it is impossible to perceive a feature like T. So even if realism were true, given any plausible interpretation of how perception works, it would be impossible to have a detector of such a feature, and so impossible to perceive it. But even if but of course a realist, a naive representationalist need not be a realist. So what about combine representation with anti-realism? If we do that, so the experience of the passage is explained as a perception illusion. Okay, we represent the world as possessing T, but as a matter of fact, T is not around. But also this way out is blocked because of what Chris Earle has named the intelligibility problem. So roughly the intelligibility problem is that any account of what the experience of passage is like should be such that it make the distinction in metaphysics between the realist and anti-realist position intelligible. And in particular, if anti-realism is true, one has to make sense, of the distinction between a reality that does not possess T and the illusion that there is T. But if you go this way, then you have to say that this distinction is explained by there being a perceptual illusion that T is around, so that we are perceptually mistake. But if Prosser's arguments are correct and we cannot perceive T, then we cannot either explain the illusion of perceiving T as a perceptual illusion. So what about reductionism? Well, reductionism has not the problem, as I said before, reduction is a friend of anti-realism, so has not the problem to face Prosser's argument, but it has still the problem of solving the intelligibility problem. So remember, the reductionist says that there are experiences that have phenomenal character corresponding to T features. Take movement, for instance. So there are experiences that possess EM. So, for instance, the direct perception of the movement of the second hand of a clock. There are experiences that lack such phenomenal character. This is an example that dates back to James. For instance, if I watch the hour hand of a clock and I remember that it used to be in another place, I don't have any experience of movement as when I directly see the hand, the second hand moving. So this experience lacks that phenomenal character. And there are experiences with EM that are correct, as the one that you just see. And there are experiences that are illusion. There are examples in ordinary life, but an example that is made often in the literature is that of the 5 movement. So basically the idea is that, which is known and studied since the 70s, basically the idea is that if you are in a completely dark room, there are 2 lights in front of you, and one gets on and gets off, on and off, and above a certain threshold, you will see a dot moving. Okay, so it's an illusion because nothing is moving there. Right? It's just this on off. So there's no continuous movement, but you see the dot moving. Okay. So the idea behind reductionist is precisely that a similar illusion is around even when we do veridically perceive movement with respect to the passage of time. So our brain tricks into there being passage, even if there's no passage, exactly as it tricks into there being movement, even though there is no movement around. The problem with this solution is that it is not a solution to the intelligibility problem, because the illusory cases of movement, of perceived movement, are misperception of an object having a continuous movement, and not of a reality in which there is no T. So the kind of illusion that the reductionist is concerned about here cannot be exploited to explain the intelligibility problem, how make sense of a reality possessing T and an illusion of us perceiving T. So what about deflationism? Of course, deflation is tailor-made to get rid of the intelligibility problem, so it doesn't even take off the ground in the deflationist setting, because there is no perceptual illusion according to the deflationism. There is a cognitive illusion. We mistake a sensation for another. So there's no problem of making sense of what is this perceptual illusion. But there is what I call the origin problem. So the problem of explaining where does the ordinary belief that time passes arise. And why this problem is pressing for the deflationist? Well, because remember, the deflationists cannot endorse the trivial answer to this question, because the deflationists, namely that the sensation of passage just is what gives rise to this belief. Well, it is the phenomenal character that gives rise to the common sense belief that time passes. But the deflationist, according to the deflationist, there is no such thing as ET. Okay? So he or she has to give us an explanation of why we mistake an experience of a T feature for an experience that time is passing. Of course, she can insist that, mine is an error theory, so the explanation is that we mistake this. But I think that that's not so satisfying, especially if you think that the deflationist has to endorse some sort of disjunctivist version of this theory, because it's not that we don't feel. Imagine the phi movement scenario below the threshold. Okay, so you don't have, you're not tricking to there being movement, but you still feel the passage of time. Okay, so you have to say that it's not movement there here that trigger the passage of time sensation or belief, but for instance qualitative change. So you need to be disjunctive, and then at this point you need also to tell me, no, what they have all these features in common that are such that they are all mistaken for the sensational passage. Okay, so once we get rid of those three rival positions, we can endorse the two main working hypotheses. The first one is just that there is something like ET, and the second one is that ET is not connected to any experience of temporal features, because it's simply not connected to any other phenomenal character. It's something that is always that all our mental episodes possess. Okay? Of course, one could try to argue against the second working hypothesis by way of thought experiments. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. Well, my general point is that given that it is a working hypothesis here, one should be careful about dismissing it quickly on the basis of maybe on a thought experiment. I think that here, we should look at it as in the context of a trade-off between how, where it leads us, and so with respect to theoretical decisions that concern other disciplines. And in particular, my defense is based on the fact that it fits nicely with what we know in the empirical literature, although I don't think I will have time to go there. But anyway, so what's my position? So what a phenomenal modifier? So let's call a worldly phenomenal character, a phenomenal character that corresponds to the what is like, to have a mental episode with a content that represents the world as having a certain feature. So the question is whether there are any non-worldly phenomenal characters, and I've already given some examples, for instance, bodily pain or moods, but also other characters that are clearly closer to the phenomenal content, but not so close which are such that it could still be plausible to think that they are not worldly. So, for instance, in normal situation, we do not attribute to the entities represented in the content of a blurred visual experience those very features. So we don't attribute to the object, of being blurred or having blurred boundaries. So the idea is that a phenomenal modifier is a no-worded feature of experience that makes a difference for the way a concurrent mental episode with a content feels to us, and so typically has an influence on the beliefs based on the concurrent content. Of course, whether the belief is accepted or not may depend on broader factors. For instance, if I'm in a scenario in which the setting is is such that my experience is very vivid, so I can say, oh, those colors are very bright, but then whether I'm willing or not to attribute this brightness to the object or just to the setting, it might depend on, for instance, what I know or other factors. Okay. So the idea is that we can have, if we maintain the position according to which ET is a phenomenal modifier, we can have the cake and eat it too, so to say. So we can have all the benefit of maintaining that there is something like a peculiar feeling of the passage, but also not running into the problem that all the other accounts have. In particular, if we endorse the first working hypothesis, and we agree on the argument against representation in reductionism, so we end up with the conclusion that ET is not worldly, which is the first part of the theory. And if we endorse the second working hypothesis, then it's unlikely that experiences of T features can be responsible or mistaken for ET, simply because there are, if all experiences have ET, then there are also experiences without T features with ET. So ET as a phenomenal modifier, it has to be, so it follows that it's also a phenomenal modifier of all experiences. That doesn't mean that that's all we can say, or it's just a primitive feature, because we can actually, I think it makes a lot of sense to investigate whether there is a cognitive mechanism underpinning ET, and whether such mechanism is connected to other mental activities. And I think there are reasons that, now I'm stopping because I already ran out of time, but just to give you an idea, there are reasons to think that this kind of theory connects nicely with the empirical evidence with respect to evaluation, and so misevaluation also of durations. Okay, and so in the Q&A I can run through some other slides, but now it's thanks at the end.
So you continually talked about us attributing blurriness to the object. And that, once it's put that way, like it sounds more like a belief thing. Like, yeah, it might look blurry to me, but we don't attribute blurriness to that because, we, for whatever reason. I mean, yeah, from that it doesn't follow that it's not still part of the content. Like you might still say, well, even though we don't attribute blurriness to the object, our experiences make it seem as though they have that feature. I mean, that's how I think of blurriness. So I wanted to hear more about.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, well, to be fair, I mean, those aren't at all uncontroversial cases because so if moods or possible pains are more plausible non-representational feature of reality, of course, maintaining the blurriness is such it's having a theoretical stance because there are representationalist accounts of blurriness, according to which when you perceive something, when you have like a blurred experience, you actually represent undeterminate boundaries for those things. Okay, and that's why you can make those judgments. Okay. So I mean, it's I think it's a little bit of a trade-off between what make where should we put the feature. So the appeal to the attribution is just to say that so there is a sense in which one can maintain that when you have a blurred visual experience, there's nothing like having the sort of automatic inclination to attribute to the object undeterminacy in boundaries, for instance, as opposed to when you see something red, you may be the most like die-hard anti-realist with respect to colors, but in a sense, your experience is such that tells you that this object is red. You have the common sense belief in that. And you might say, well, in the case of blurriness, it's not like that. Okay? And not just because we don't know. We know that it's something funny going through our eyes, so it feels differently. I know, I mean, it's like, it's not down as a point, but it's not plausible to maintain that and see where that leads us.
I think he's trying to get our attention.
So, Nick, do you have a question?
Oh, well, I do, but I was just saying hi, actually, that we're back.
Oh. Okay, hi.
So can I ask? So, about deflationism, I guess, which is what I think is right. And I think where we first met was probably I gave a talk in Barcelona a few years ago where it was still a little unclear at that point, but I think I was arguing for a version of deflationism then, and the way you characterized it sounds exactly like what I think. So I guess I'll give an answer. My answer to that was well, I like your questions, and I take that seriously. The answer is going to be something like, poor philosophizing and theorizing about what's going on. Once you start to think about, you start to sort of think about passage, you've kind of got a theory into which all these sort of disjunctive things will sort of slot, and you can sort of see why people might then end up I guess taking everything as passage, and how when they communicate with one another, that might become a sort of more widely adopted sort of view. So I guess that's the sort of answer I would give. But maybe that's the trivial answer you were suggesting anyway.
Okay. So you're saying that you have a sort of pragmatic account of why there is a disjunction of features that we all mistake for. And it would be just because it's easier to talk that way, or did I get you?
Well, just once somebody, I should think of it in the sort of Baconian fallacies, right? Sort of once you sort of have a theory that sort of you start to sort of theorize about your experiences a little bit, it's easy to come up with a sort of bad theory about the character of your experiences. And then once you have that sort of theory, it's very natural to sort of try to accommodate everything into that theory. So the theory being that I'm sort of experiencing passage, I guess. Like people are pretty uncritical about intuitive theories. So.
No, of course. That's why I think that the kind of account that one has to end up with then has to fit as nicely as possible with all the other data. That's something that I take it as a desideratum of the account. I'm so I have to say that. I've been flirting with Deflationism as well. So I mean, I think it's the best option. It's the best alternative to what the alternative I'm defending. I still think that the problem with the Deflation is that it's the kind of account that the Deflation has to give of how the belief rises. It's a little bit ad hoc because if you take seriously the Deflationists claim that there is no such thing as the thing of the passage of the pure passage of time. So why do we believe that time passes? And it's not that. So the reductionist has a problem, I think, much more serious, but at least there as an account, because it says, well, the sensational passage is to be reduced to the T features, the experience of the T features, but every experience of the T features is also an experience with this passage quality, because it is what the quality is, basically. The Deflationist, if it's really a Deflationist, it cannot go that way. It really has to say that it's a mistake, and if it's a mistake of if it's one feature that we mistake it, then well, that's just a default error theory, fine. Okay. But if it's like a disjunction of various features, then I think that something is really missing. So something should be that the theory should, even just an error theory, should be enriched by an account of what have in common all those features that they all get mistaken for the passage. It's not knocked down. I mean, I agree that Deflationist is an option on the market. I'm just saying that one could doubt that that can face a problem like that, and then let's see whether a non-representationalist option can fare better.
Okay, we have a finger in
I'm
Geneva.
just going to say one quick follow-up, which was just, I mean, I guess I will think about it. I'm kind of more comfortable with the disjunction, and in a way, I think I would I'm happy enough to sort of increase my disjunction to include deflationism and the view that you're suggesting as well, that all of those things are going into the, I mean, I kind of agree, what you're saying sounds plausible to me as well, and I would kind of take them together. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe there's a way to fit them. I mean,
yeah, I wanted to, I don't know anything about the philosophy of mind, literature, and this, but I wanted to push back on behalf of the Deflationists myself. It seems like, so, you end up with your argument like, yeah, you have a big disjunction, so the argument doesn't work. But it seems that there's a natural candidate to, for a feature that they have all the things in common, which is the one that we will think about. It's change. But it's change, right? I mean, you took the example of the movement. There's nothing that moves there, but of course there's something that's changing. So it seems that change is the broader notion, and then from that we mistake the experience of change for the experience of passage of time. I think that's the most natural. If you want to find a common feature, it's the natural. So suppose, for example, Gödel and McTaggart actually argue in the first mindset. If you have a change in the universe, people would have a timeless universe. It seems that that's the same intuition there. It's change. I mean, it seems a natural candidate. It's the only thing. It's a very broad thing.
Yeah, I mean, like. Yeah, okay, because the idea is that they have to be all qualitative features. Again, because one could say, oh, okay, change maybe is good for qualitative change and movement, but succession or duration, for persistence. But of course, I agree that that's not an answer because they have to be qualitative.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you are just claiming that you are perceiving some sort of P, something.
Exactly.
Pure dynamic feature, and you fall back to naive representation. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, like, so I think that one thing is to having a characterization of what they have in common from a theoretical point of view, and that I think that your proposal is the best good proposal. And the other thing is to say what they have in common that is such that could, as experience, could explain that those liberals will come into a mistake. And it's not clear to me that just just characterizing them as as form of change would be explanatorily sufficient here. So that's what I would ask.
So I have a question as well, if you don't mind. So you unfortunately had to skip over that part. You claimed in some of the latter slides that your view is supported by empirical evidence, by findings in empirical cognitive science. Now, I would like to ask specifically that whether that is directly evidence in favor of your theory, or whether it is rather evidence maybe against some of these alternatives, but perhaps not all of them. In particular, I would be interested to hear how it fares vis-a-vis deflationism, whether deflationism wouldn't have a way of dealing with these empirical findings as well, and maybe even see them as confirmation for deflationism as well.
Yeah, of course. Now, okay, let's be honest here. It's not even that they support my position. It's just that I think that if one endorses my position can make sense, probably in a better way of some part of the literature, and what actually I find more interesting that although that's of course is a sort of like claim that I'm making is that probably it's sort of like it's a good way to look for. So it's at least. So if you endorse the position and you look at the existing literature, the idea is that you can see that there are distinctions that are not made in the literature, and then it could be interesting to look into. Okay. So roughly, to be very shortly, the idea is the following: that there is a lot of literature on misperception of duration. So there are misjudgments, not very bored and fever. But there are also misperceptions. So like you are in a situation in which you have a peak of dopamine because you are under pressure, or fear, or of course certain drugs also do that. And you report that you felt or like a car accident. So there are also more controlled situations. And you report that you have experienced those 2 seconds as lasting long. Okay? And so the idea here is that there's a lot of literature on how we should account for the misjudgment. Even it's clear it's not just a misjudgment. Okay? But no literature goes for accounting for the different phenomenology. And my idea is that, well, if we assume that there is that the phenomenal modifier account is correct, then we can plausibly maintain that there is a cognitive mechanism responsible for that, and that might interact with other things like dopamine levels, and then that would be an explanation of both of why there is a different phenomenology and of why we misjudge, because precisely as when the light is very bright and we don't realize it, we might misjudge the brightness of the colors, there might be a similar situation there. So I think that it's not that the current literature provides support, it's just that if you put them together, it looks like we can explain more.
Okay.
And yes, if one is adapting, it's important.
Right, sure. All right. So if there are no more questions, please join me in thanking Giuliano again.